Hello and welcome to episode 175 of Magic Rays of Light, a podcast exploring the world of Apple TV and so much more. I'm Sigmund Judge and I'm joined once again by my co-host, Mr. Devon Dundee. And of course, later we'll have a recap of Carême and a roundup of the world of Apple TV. But Devon, we've both been moviegoers this past week. And we've both contributed to F1 Movie's $144 million opening weekend global record, making it currently the number one movie in the world. How was your experience?
Oh, it was awesome, Sigmund. I just want to give us both some congratulations. We did it, you and I. We made the film a success between all of our ticket sales. But no, it was really cool to get out to the theaters. I bought my giant bucket of popcorn. It wasn't shaped like a helmet. It was just a regular popcorn bucket, but popcorn was great either way. And the theater was really well attended. Lots of showings going on. So it was great to get out, see the film. I think I'll share more about the film in a future episode, my thoughts, and break it all down. But it was a lot of fun. I'm happy that people are getting out and seeing it. And to see the numbers coming in, it seems like we were not the only ones going out this weekend to check out F1.
Absolutely. And in fact, just today, as I was kind of getting things ready for the podcast at a local coffee shop, I heard someone come in for their iced coffee and say, I'm going to the cinema today and I'm going to go and see F1. And the people that normally serve me looked at me and I just mutedly celebrated, pumped my fists. So I'm happy because it's a film that we've been waiting for, and really it's a film that we were hoping would be successful based on our love for the theatrical experience and the shared in-person experience where you can feel the excitement, you can feel the gasps, you can laugh together. There's just something really, really special about that. Now, F1, as we mentioned, $144 million international opening weekend on what Apple are citing as a $200 million budget. Now, when you include a reported $50 million made back from sponsorships, which are throughout the film, and of course have then been adapted for products outside, there's a robot vacuum that I saw that was APXGP edition branded by, I think, Shark. And privately, we joked about the fact that I needed a robot vacuum and this might be it. It wasn't. I'm still waiting. When you take into that factor of 50 million, it really feels like we're already at the point now, based on Apple's figures, this coming week will pretty much cover the media blitz. I know there's been a little bit of backlash on a couple of the things, including the notification from the Wallet app, which just so happens to come now. We're waiting for iOS 18.6, which apparently is going to allow you to turn off those notifications. The skeptics amongst us will probably think that's very well timed. What was the experience like on the big screen? Did you feel like you were missing anything, not seeing it on IMAX, which obviously was the format that it was filmed for? And in terms of the performance and the system and everything, was it as loud as how we expressed it last week during that portion of the show?
I'll say it definitely was loud, even for a theatrical experience. And I think you kind of need that with this kind of film. So yeah, as far as that goes, I definitely got the impact there. I saw it on a more standard screen. It's the biggest screen that I had access to, and everyone who's heard the advice, watch it on the biggest screen you have access to. That definitely applies. I went and did that, but mine was a standard theater. I'd say it was still a great experience. I would love to experience it on IMAX, obviously, but just given where I live and kind of the theatrical setup here, you make do with what you can. And I would just say, just the difference between seeing it at home versus in any theater is such a huge gap. That is such a big difference, even more so than going from my local theater to IMAX. That is a great experience. Everyone who has access to that, I think, definitely should. But regardless of what kind of theatrical setup you have near you, if you live in the middle of nowhere like I do, it's still worth it to go out and see it in the theaters because it is just an awesome experience. there's several moments during the film where the entire crowd just gasps and we're holding our breath. And you just can't get that sitting at home alone. There's something about seeing it on the bigger screen with other people, having that experience together, that's just really special. So yeah, I'm thankful for my little local theater. It's in a rural area. They do their best. And I'm thankful for all those small theaters that are serving communities like mine out there, because they're an important part of the system too. So it doesn't have to be IMAX, just the biggest screen that you can. Go check out F1 because it's worth seeing it in theaters.
Now, when we're talking about the shared experience, there was a shared experience that I mentioned a couple weeks ago when I recommended 28 Years Later, the new Danny Boyle zombie flick. And here's a fun one. I ended up making my way that week to a screening in the church from 28 Days Later for 28 Years Later. But here's the catch, Devon. The week that I made it my up next pick was not the week of the screening. So I actually turned up 1 week early. Nothing was going on. So last week, in a week that was already packed with F1 and everything around that, I ended up going to see 28 Years Later in a church that was raising money to renovate its crypt, which is going to cost £10 million, which is absolutely insane. And there were massive gasps from the whole audience on that. But this screening for 28 Years Later, it was in a church in East London, a church that lent its support for the original film and had a pivotal scene filmed within it. And it was a really, really cool night. I went with my friend Tom, and after the screening of this film, which was shot with iPhone predominantly, there was a cool Q&A session with the director, Danny Boyle, and I got to ask this quick little question that, well, the answer got us both thinking. Hi, great film, and what experience to watch it with people. Talking about the pandemic earlier, it made me realise actually how much I missed it and how special this is. With regard to, iPhone's reference and, of course, the Steve Jobs film that you were behind, I wondered what your view was on immersive 180-degree video, and if that is something that interests you, even if it is just the challenge that's inherent with it.
I don't think in my lifetime, but I think you will end up inside that screen somehow. I don't know if cinema continues as a communal experience, which I think it should do, because we are being developed by the technologists to communicate ever more powerfully, but always through their device. And you sacrifice something communal. So communal experiences for me like this, I will always support. I'd always go to football games, partly because I love football, but obviously the communal experience, a rock concert, theatre, dance, whatever it is, something happens to us that's different. Even you don't know the people, it's not like huggy, cuddly or anything like that. You're not making friends, new friends, but something communal happens, and we're losing that, I think. There's a danger of losing that. But I think if cinema does continue, which I hope it will, I think you'll end up inside the screen in some way. I don't know how that will be, but the technology that we use, the iPhones, the surround thing, was a kind of little gesture at that. I think more of that will emerge, really.
Well, first of all, Sigmund, props for inserting Steve Jobs into your question. You had to remind Danny Boyle that he directed the Steve Jobs movie. And, of course, lots of Apple ties with this film. And as Apple continues to just integrate itself further and further into the theatrical world, the whole conversation does involve the company at a lot of levels. And so this was a really interesting answer from Danny, from someone who works in the film industry, but also obviously has a deep understanding of Apple and technology, having that history with the Steve Jobs biopic. And so I thought his answer was just so intriguing, coming from that technological aspect, but with that love of film at the same time. And it got me thinking a lot, because he said something to the effect of a lot of the technology that's being put out today by these big companies is very much personalized, and which is great. We want our technology to be personal. We want it to feel like it's made for us, but it can also be isolating in a way. We have these incredible screens and devices that we get to use, even something like Apple Vision Pro, that we get to watch movies on these giant screens, right? And it's incredible, but at a certain level, it can also kind of close us off from the communal aspect of enjoying art and especially filmmaking. And so I just thought that was such an interesting dichotomy that I hadn't really thought about before. Just the way that technology progresses. Of course, technology has made the film-going experience better over time, but a lot of the innovation that's happening now is happening more on these devices that are meant for individuals. And it's important for us to remember, even as cool as all of that is, that we're meant to be a part of these communities and experiencing things together. And that as the technology, just by its nature, I don't think intentionally, but just by its nature, kind of silos us off a little bit and is more personalized, we've got to keep in mind the importance of being together for these kinds of experiences as well.
Yeah, very much so. And I think, there was a strong feeling that I think everyone felt in the audience, even I would say some of those that didn't make it all the way through the film. There is a really special nature to coming together and watching something, I wanted to kind of tackle this question, and I think it's brought up two really, really interesting aspects. The one that I want to start with is the survival of the theatrical experience, right? And then we'll get into what I thought was a wild end to the answer, the idea that we may end up inside of the screen. And I thought it was wild, but then I really started to think about it and started to wonder whether or not we're already there at this point, or if we're just a few steps away. So we'll get there. But let's talk about the movie-going experience, because it feels like movie-going is increasing in popularity, finally, after the pandemic. I think people are getting used to it. We saw just this past weekend that much younger demographics flocked to F1 than we were expecting. It was marketed very much as the Barbie for dads, is what I think one of the outlets made their headline for their review, which I think a lot of people clasped onto. But I think it had a lot more mainstream appeal. Look at the popularity of Minecraft, and then the spectacle of Mission Impossible. We've got Superman returning next week. I think in the fall we've got the next Tron film, Tron Ares. And then I'm already getting excited for the next Christopher Nolan film, The Odyssey, which is going to receive its trailer preview exclusively in theaters this week. And then we've got Project Hail Mary from Phil Lord and Christopher Miller. I had no idea what they were up to, and that just blew me away. So check out the trailers for all of those.
I think it is a really great time to be a film lover, to enjoy going to the movies. There was a time after the pandemic when going to the cinema, at least for me, was a little bit depressing, just in terms of the number of people who were there and not feeling like it was really something that was booming and thriving. But that feel for me has certainly changed. The lineup right now is incredible. It feels like people are connecting more with the films that are out, and just being a part of this whole experience that has been around for so long. And there's been people speculating about the future of the film industry and theaters. Are they going to survive? And of course, it's tough times for a lot of different industries, including the theatrical industry. But it feels like what we're seeing now is a testament to the fact that it is going to be with us for some time to come, because it is just such a central part of what so many people love to do. And it's just something that's been a part of the culture in a way that I think is important and is going to stick around. One thing that we've also seen, especially in more recent years, is struggles sometimes with etiquette at the movie theater, and the way that people sometimes act. And I don't know, maybe I sound a little bit uptight about certain things. I understand there are scenarios where, if there's an emergency, if there's something important that you're needing to keep an eye on, I had to have a babysitter when I went to the theater, and I'm not going to lie, I was concerned about my son and, wanted to make sure that he was okay. But it's also important to be considerate of the people around you in the theater. And I think cell phones in particular have presented a really difficult transition for people going to theaters and taking that time away from their phones. And I don't know about you, Sigmund, but that's something I even noticed with my F1 screening. I try not to focus too much on other people at the theater because I want to be there for the film, and I don't want to be grumpy. That's not really my approach to life. But there were definitely a couple things I was like, really, guys, can we not just hold off for another hour and a half and let this film finish before we start doing that?
So my rule is I set a shortcut that is location focused to turn my watch into theater mode, put my phone on silent. It all absolutely happens automatically. And maybe we need to print out some QR codes and put them in our theaters so people can get it to work for them. Because I do think there is a part of the kind of phone addiction epidemic that we see where people just actually don't know the tools that are available to them to help them from being distracted in something like that. And there are some people that just don't care about the next person beside them. And etiquette is a really interesting one because all throughout this week, I've seen the F1, the movie, socials, reposting photos from people taking photos and video in a screen, which isn't allowed by law, but does seem to be in a roundabout way. And I think it is a case of short-termism in effect. But we're seeing this kind of behaviour almost promoted, which is a bad, bad look, especially when you've got the likes of Martin Scorsese recently making it known that they've actually given up on going to see films in the cinema because of cinema etiquette and the state of it. Although he was reminded during this conversation that happened, I think a couple months ago now, that he did something very similar, but it was always commentary about the film as opposed to being distracted by a tweet or something else on their phone. So it is very different, and they were still connected to the film in that way. And one of these big problems that I feel like Apple in a lot of ways has brought to the movie-going experience is something that Apple could solve. I don't know if you remember, I think it was unearthed in 2011, but it was actually a patent that was filed in 2009. And there was this patent about using infrared signals to disable camera activity on the phones. And I think the example that was given was more at concerts, which everyone was like, how dare you? Although I've been to a concert this past weekend, and the amount of people, even at like a heavy hard rock show, had their phones lofted in the sky, was incredible to me. I'm old, right? I'm obviously too old. But for a cinema, I can totally understand that. I believe there's like some kind of infrared camera going on in most screens now in terms of, being able to capture what's going on in the cinema, and then should someone be infringing on copyright or whatever, they've got some protections there. Controversial. I think we'll leave a link to this patent in the show notes, but I think this is something that should be a technology that should be looked at rather than going down the other route of almost asking everyone to give in their phones and put it in a Faraday cage, because of course we've had examples in the United States where the cinema's not always been the safest place for patrons, even though it should be a safe haven. And I think that would be a good in-between there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think I had heard about this patent until it came up as part of our show planning for this episode. It's an interesting idea. I think it had to be pretty tightly controlled so it didn't end up in the wrong scenario where, people needing to use their phone cameras couldn't. But I think there are certainly solutions, like you mentioned, for individuals to take advantage of, to lock down their phones, and maybe more education about that. Maybe some kind of system level where locations can recommend it. Like you get a notification when you walk in the theater and it says, hey, would you like to go ahead and put on do not disturb and theater mode? And then when you leave, we'll go ahead and turn it off for you. Things like that. I think this is certainly something that could be solved with technology, but there's also just kind of a mindset of respecting other people that needs to be a little more common, I think. And like I said, there's always exceptions. You don't know someone else's exact scenario, so I try not to be too grumpy or judge. But anything we can do to make it a more seamless and uninterrupted experience for people, I think is a good thing. So we can get Martin Scorsese back in the theaters. I want him to keep going out and seeing films like the rest of us do.
Now, part of the future of this movie-going experience is, of course, us as patrons going to the films, and then obviously the etiquette that we uphold when going to see a film. But there's also a responsibility from the studios. We've talked many a time about our disappointment when Apple pulled Wolves from theaters, and that didn't happen. And, we've got a few limited releases that seem to be happening with each release if you're in a certain big city, in the United States or the UK mainly. In comparison to what Apple have done in recent times, Amazon MGM seem to be having quite a fun time of it, in the sense that they are releasing pretty much all of their films theatrically, whilst none of them have reached the pinnacle. I believe actually F1 is a record breaker, and of course people that make the films are also going to be interested in having that commitment there as well. So I think there's a really interesting thing at play there. But there's also a rumour that came about this past weekend as well. I'm not talking about the sequel to F1, which F1 2? I don't know, maybe 2 on the nose. But instead about Apple getting into theatrical distribution themselves rather than going down the partner route that we've seen with Sony and most recently Warner Brothers, who, let's be honest, are top of their game when it comes to theatrical releases and promoting them. So a great decision there by Apple. What do we know about this?
Well, all we really know is that it seems like in the wake of all the work that's gone into promoting F1, there's some kind of conversation within Apple that maybe they could do this in-house. And that feels like maybe just a part of Apple's DNA, that anything they do, they look at least the possibility of doing it themselves. And let's be honest, there was a time when probably most people would have thought it would be ridiculous for Apple to think about getting into the streaming game. And here they are with Apple TV Plus all these years later. And so I don't know. I think there's a lot of ways you could react to this. It's hard to argue with what Warner Brothers has done with F1. And, I think to start that up from scratch in terms of the international distribution, all the local markets and trying to localize things as best as possible, that's a lot of work. But at the same time, anything Apple does to get further into the theatrical world and innovate there, I'm going to applaud as well. So whether they want to partner in that sense or whether they want to do it themselves, I'm happy either way. I just want them to continue to invest in those wide theatrical releases. And so to me, the best part of this rumor is just that the company does see a future in that sense. And you're not going to start up a whole distribution arm for like one film a year, right? That would be a waste. So to me, this is an indication, even if the distribution arm doesn't work out, it's at least an indication that Apple's eyes are still on the theaters and that they still see a future for their films as wide theatrical releases, which is encouraging to me.
And I do wonder if, like, some of the conversations that were had at CinemaCon earlier this year, that Apple, I think it was the first time they'd attended, publicly at least, I wonder if some of the conversations with some of the smaller theatre owners that you were mentioning at the beginning of this episode, whether that has adjusted their kind of expectations and their views on, cinema and the theatrical experience and exhibitionists as a whole beyond the big multiplexes. Now, when you and I go to the cinema, is there a particular seat that you choose? Because I'm very much as central as possible, but I know some people that much prefer to have a seat right at the front, to be immersed almost as though they were inside the screen. That's something that I thought of when Danny gave his thoughts on the next part, which honestly, what I was trying to get at was, Mr. Boyle, are you interested in immersive video and producing for immersive video? And are you in talks to do such? Because, this is a man that obviously understands Apple as a company and their ethos, and has worked predominantly with iPhone on this most recent film 28 years later. What I got was a very different answer to what I was expecting, which was almost going a little bit further, saying, I imagine one day we will be inside the screen. There were two things that I thought about. Last year, we talked about a patent that unearthed from Apple with regard to projection systems. And we got a little bit carried away at some point last year, and then we kind of revisited things earlier this year on projection systems and making the at-home experience more immersive in that regard and more kind of world-filling, or room-filling at least. But then I saw a patent that was unearthed by YM Cinema this past week about a new image sensor being created by Apple that has a very different way in which is being produced, with 20 stops of usable dynamic range. And I thought this was fascinating. Now, when we talk about cameras and cinema cameras that are being used in production, like the Alexa LF and these kinds, they have high dynamic range stops, but a lot of them aren't usable because grain will come in. They won't work great in low noise. We've experienced this even on our iPhones. As amazing as the cameras are on our phones, the image starts to break down in different conditions. The patent that's being mentioned here is about 20 stops of dynamic range with next to no noise. So why dynamic range is important is the human eye can apparently decipher 21 stops, right? So we're getting to that level where, should the technology become available to play back, not just record, we are almost going to live in an alternate reality that is almost imperceivable to real life. And I wonder if that's what Danny was getting at. Just a few little bits about this. First off, the dynamic range is of 120 dB, which translates to nearly 20 stops of usable dynamic range. This technology is supposedly going to be a stacked technology. Cinematic HDR for mobile devices, a real-time noise-free video capture, so not just pre-recorded video, but we're talking about live video as well, which I think also translates very much into the idea of being in a screen and almost living an alternate reality. And this report, which ends on this quote from YM Cinema, is that Apple isn't just iterating on camera software, it's redefining the image sensor from the silicon up. And if this tech goes into production, we could be looking at a new gold standard in digital imaging, not just for smartphones, but for cinema itself. There's a lot, I guess, to unpack there, but what are your thoughts on, I guess, living inside the screen, or being inside the screen as opposed to something that's attached to your face or something you walk in, but actually something that you're almost living? I feel like something that, an experience where you actually go to the cinema. If cinemas don't exist, that's going to be the way that we experience this kind of old-timey aspect of, movie exhibition. hopefully that doesn't happen, but
Well, I think when you hear about these disparate technologies that are being in development and these patents and things that are concepts right now, it's sometimes hard to understand how that technology is actually going to come together and form a product that people are going to experience. And I don't claim to know all the answers of how it's all going to be put together. That's way above my pay grade. But I think looking at these pieces and what we know just about video and the human brain, the way the human brain processes video, we know even from the rudimentary VR that we have now that the human brain can definitely be tricked into believing it is in a different place than its body actually is. And we've all seen the videos of people playing on VR and getting tricked into thinking they're on a very tall building and being very scared when they fall and things like that. And so, yeah, I think that a technology like this, where you could get the dynamic range where it nearly matches real life, and the capability of the human eye at least to perceive real life, I think that could go a long way also towards making video more realistic. And then I think the barrier to me is going to be how many people can participate in an immersive experience like that, coming inside the screen to where it's actually going to be immersive for each person who's there and realistic enough to trick the brain into thinking that they're in it. And so I don't know exactly how all that's going to work out. Maybe the future of theatrical is smaller theaters and you're in a cohort of a dozen or a couple dozen people experiencing something together. Obviously, you'd have to think about the pricing dynamics and renovating these theaters and things like that. But I could see a future where if this technology that Apple's working on, and of course other players in the industry are working on too, and eventually these become standards that theaters and creators and projector makers can adopt, I could see a future where what Danny Boyle's talking about could be real and the future of cinema is more immersive without needing necessarily the technology that we're using now to simulate immersive, but actually going somewhere and just being surrounded by what you're watching. I think that would be really cool. It would be something new that I think we haven't seen before, other than maybe at theme parks and very controlled experiences like that where they're playing the same movie every 10 minutes over and over again. But something like this where it would not only be great for viewers, but also be a great creative avenue for people who are creating these things to explore. And the theatrical industry, as much as we talk about it being a staple for so long, it has changed a lot too. The technology has come a long way. I mean, you talk about when people thought it was innovative that movies could have audio that went along with them. And now look at where we are. And so it is constantly changing. And I think that change does help with the next generation kind of cement for them this experience that previous generations have experienced in their own way, but making it a part of their cultural context as well. So, yeah, I think there's something to the idea. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. I think it's still very much in the early stages of these technologies being tested and created and patented. But I would love to step inside movies one day, maybe a decade or two from now, and have that immersive experience that, you know, we get tastes of in other ways, but have it communally in a theater. I think that would be amazing.
Do you think both, like the traditional theatrical experience and maybe a virtual theatrical experience where you are sharing with people, do you think they could both coexist once both forms became mainstream? Because there's one element of cinema going in the UK which I cannot stand, and that is having to wait for certain distribution deals and certain gaps in the market to catch up with the US. There's films that I'm still waiting for. In fact, my up next pick this week hasn't yet made its way to theatres yet, and it's already on PVOD in the States, and so there's a way of me being able to watch already. Does that affect global distribution, and does that then mean that traditional theatres couldn't survive at the same time?
I think it would have to be at least a transition period for some time, and we've seen this in the theatrical industry before as projection quality changes, as sound technology changes. There's theaters who are on the cutting edge and are ready to tear their whole thing down and rebuild it with the next big thing because the audience is there. And then there are theaters that are a little slower and take their time and emphasize the more traditional experiences. And I think there's room for both, especially if the audience size is going to have to be smaller for these more immersive things. And I think the traditional is going to have to continue. And then you also have to think about at-home experiences as well, because people aren't going to be installing these curved walls with seats in them and, this kind of thing at home. I'm sure there'll be some people, and we'll link to them on the show when the time does come. But for the most part, at least at home and on the go, you're going to still be watching the traditional 2D non-immersive films, at least for the time being. So I think there's going to have to be room for both, maybe even opportunities where you could release a film both ways and have that traditional experience, but also have the enhanced immersive version as well. And I could see theaters moving to a hybrid approach, and it would be a big differentiator at first. It would feel like going to a theme park sort of for the first few years for people who are able to do it, and then eventually it would get democratized and move down. But yeah, I don't foresee the current formats going away anytime soon, just because they're so ingrained and so long standing. There's a reason that format has worked for so long, and so I think that it's going to continue to live on, and I think it's something we're going to be enjoying for years to come.
Well, I just want to put it out there very quickly that you talking about curved screens and video walls and this kind of thing is not a hint to any plans that I have in the future.
Sure.
Right? I want to let family and friends know that might be listening to the podcast. However, if I did have a plan to do that, I'd need a new HDMI standard to be able to bring up that resolution, right? To make that screen or that wall look as crispy as possible. And, well, the HDMI 2.2 spec was released after a CES preview in January, which we detailed. But just to recap some of the details, the new spec doubles the bandwidth of HDMI 2.1 from 48 to 96 gigabytes per second, supports 4K, 8K, and 16K. I guess that's enough resolution, and we're, kind of going back to what we were talking about with this patent from Apple. Could be really interesting. Uncompressed 4K at 240 hertz, which of course, the actual speed of these displays and of the captures are going to be just as important as the resolution. There's also DSC 1.2A compression for 4K 480 hertz, 8K 240 hertz, and 16K 60 hertz. And I laugh every time I say 16K because it just sounds unfathomable and silly to me. It also introduces a latency indication protocol for improved AV sync, while continuing to support all of the HDMI 2.1 features such as VRR, QMS, ALLM, eARC, etc. It's fully backwards compatible, but the increased bandwidth does require a new cable called Ultra 96. It's going to be available at the end of this year. And what's interesting to me is that Ultra 96 compatible hardware is probably not going to come for like another year or two. Now, our friend Rasmus at Flat Panels HD had a little more insight here in regard to Ultra 96 and its branding, saying that Ultra 96 branding can appear on both cables and HDMI ports. But here is the caveat. If you see Ultra 96 on a cable, it is certified for up to 96 gigabytes per second bandwidth. If the label is printed on a device's HDMI port, it does not necessarily confirm 96 gigabytes per second support, which is this kind of area of confusion that's always been the case. I think since the days of HD Ready and Full HD, and, nothing is completely transparent until you take it home, realize it doesn't do it, you send it back, and then you're told, oh well, actually no one has produced anything to hit these specs just yet. This is something that is quite a long rollout. Of course, TV makers and other consumer electronics makers are going to now begin integrating HDMI 2.2 into upcoming products. So if there is a warehouse somewhere with a new Apple TV generation, I think it's safe to say it's unlikely to be up to spec. TVs, not expected until 2027, Devon, which hurts, to be quite honest with you, because I've got my beady eyes on that Panasonic Tandem OLED that's coming out in just a few months' time.
Well, maybe the next version will have HDMI 2.2, but regardless, you can at least start stocking up on your Ultra 96 cables and have that infrastructure ready. HDMI 2.2, it's one of those rollouts. It's just something that takes time to get into the whole ecosystem, but it'll be really nice once it's all rolled out. It'll take a few years for transition, but before long, we'll all be rocking HDMI 2.2 segment, and you'll have your Tandem OLED and Ultra 96, and it'll be all nice and amazing. You can watch your 16K content on your next TV.
Hey, we've been doing this show for 5 years. In 5 years' time, I guarantee you've got a video wall somewhere in the house.
In the meantime, I'm taking advantage of some Apple TV features that are probably old news to some of our listeners, but something I got to experience for the first time this week. I wanted to shout it out. It's the shared audio experience on Apple TV, which is similar to sharing audio on other platforms. I do it all the time on my iPad, but for whatever reason, I hadn't tried it on my Apple TV before. And I had occasion one night this week. Noah was asleep. Catherine and I wanted to watch some Ironheart, and we didn't want to disturb him. And we were in the living room, and we just decided, hey, let's give this a try. And I thought it would be a complex setup. Doing it on the iPad takes a few steps if you don't want to completely unlink the AirPods from one account and attach them to the other. But the Apple TV, it's doing some magic to where straight in Control Center, you go to the audio selection, and it's pulling in not only my iCloud audio devices, but hers as well, right on the same screen. You just select both of them, and they start. And I don't know how this hasn't come to the iPad and other devices yet, because this is incredible and it's such a seamless experience. I love it on my iPad. I'm not trying to make it sound like it's a terrible feature there, but I thought it would be more of a process on the Apple TV, and it worked perfectly. We had a great experience. It was strange sitting in the living room with our two HomePods not making any noise whatsoever, but the big screen going. And I took off my headphones a couple times just to make sure that there was no sound in the room, because I didn't want to wake my son. And just such a cool experience. Again, something I'm sure lots of our listeners do all the time. It's been in the OS for some time now, but I just wanted to shout that feature out because it really is so good.
And I think it's a really good time to shout it out as well, because what you're experiencing with iCloud and basically all of the devices from different iCloud accounts being able to tie in on the OS side is something that's fairly new. I think they only came in the last maybe 6 to 9 months. And don't forget, when this was first introduced, you couldn't do Atmos at the same time through two pairs. It was stereo only, and that changed a couple of years ago. So if shared audio is something you experienced a long time ago on Apple TV, didn't quite do it for you, I think this is perfect. Plus, you've also got conversation awareness as well. So you don't need to be isolated from one another on the couch. You can still talk, and it's perfectly fine. Although, sometimes a thumbs up and a nod is good enough. Or a wow, mouthed. But yeah, really, really cool. I'm glad that you actually brought this up this week. It's something we need to do more often, actually. Talk a little bit about some of the benefits that have come to the platform that have otherwise been forgotten.
Yeah, we take advantage of them, and then we take them for granted because we just think of them as normal. Every once in a while, it's cool to experience something new for the first time and just get to be amazed by it. An app that's constantly improving, and I think amazing fans of different areas in different ways, is the Apple Sports app. This week's been updated to version 3.0. Every time there's a big update to the Sports app segment, I imagine someone in the world is just like, yes, finally. This time around, it's for the tennis fans, because just in time for Wimbledon, the Sports app now features coverage of both men and women's single tennis in the Grand Slam and 1,000 level events, with the app's background changing to match the court surface of the game being played. That's a pretty cool little addition there. So if you're wondering what surface they're playing on, you can just look at the background. This new version also features an updated customizable home screen. Users can rearrange sections to feature the sports and leagues they care about most at the top. So if you're following a lot of sports, you can set your priorities there and see what you want to see first. And then in baseball game listings, the current batter and pitcher matchup will be displayed just below the score. Again, for someone out there, that's a finally, and it's cool to see these features added. The Apple Sports app already on version 3.0. Apple really is putting a lot into this, and it's cool to see it continue to grow and change.
Yeah, I think this was, when it was introduced, I remember just kind of going, why are Apple doing this? It seems really unlike them. But it's an app that, as it's grown, I'm using more and more and more. And every time there is an update, there seems to be a lot of interest. Because the fact that when Apple fill a gap, there's a call from a fan of another sport requesting integration, I think that's a real telling sign. Of course, this past week it was cricket fans, and I've got a funny feeling that will come at some point. But yeah, the sports app, something that I genuinely am using as my central spot now, especially because of the speed of the updates for the scores. A fantastic app that we'll continue to celebrate with every update, I think. And, well, that celebration also continues into Apple Music, because it is celebrating, and it just shows how fast time flies by. Its 10th anniversary. Apple Music this week announcing a slew of announcements. The company's opening a new studio space in Los Angeles with 2 radio studios, a soundstage, a spatial audio mixing room, and a photo and social media lab, along with much more. Apple Music Radio also aired specials all day on Monday, including Don't Be Boring, the birth of Apple Music Radio. That was with hosts Zane Lowe and Ebro Darden. And Apple's also unveiling the top 500 most streamed songs from the last 10 years, with 100 songs revealed daily throughout the week, maybe the subject of another book to go along with the album book that I have and have looked at maybe twice, Devon. And I think the most interesting thing is actually for subscribers who can now have access to a new personalized playlist on the music app's home tab, Replay All Time, which allows you to stream the songs you've listened to most since joining Apple Music. And, well, we didn't want to do any reveals on the show this week, but maybe they'll come in the weeks to come.
Well, Sigmund, let's just say if you tried to guess the top artists in my playlist, you'd probably get it right. And surprisingly enough, despite the fact that I've been an Apple Music subscriber since the beginning, some children's music has already made its way into my Replay All Time, which is pretty incredible given the time frame there. But that just shows how much children's music I'm currently listening to, and that I forget to turn on the focus mode from time to time when I'm listening to it. Now on to some Apple Original news. Starting with some release news. Apple Original Kids and Family series Stillwater, starring a wise panda who teaches children about the world and each other, will return for its 4th season on August 1st on Apple TV+. Really excited to see that, and it's going to be very entertaining for the young eyes amongst us. And let's be honest, some good lessons being taught that, you know, the adults could learn a thing or two from the panda as well. Definitely. I think we could all use a little more calm entertainment on our screen. Stillwater definitely provides that, so I'm glad it's coming back for a 4th season. In production news, Apple has landed a new 3-part docuseries from Skydance Sports, following the University of Connecticut women's basketball dynasty over the 40-year career of the team's Hall of Fame head coach, Gino Auriemma. Directed by Matthew Hamachek and Erica Sashin, the series reveals the epic narrative of UConn's roller coaster path to becoming the greatest dynasty in women's sports history, with each episode featuring a blend of unique archival footage, incisive interviews, and intimate access with UConn's 2024-25 championship squad. The series is currently in production and will join Apple TV Plus's ever-growing lineup of sports series at a later date. This sounds very cool. I'm excited that they're featuring a women's team in this series, and one that's so relevant right now being the reigning champions, so this will be cool to see when it comes to the service. And meanwhile, the second season of Criminal Records, starring Cush Jumbo and Peter Capaldi, has wrapped filming as well.
In development, Apple TV Plus have announced I'm Glad My Mum Died, a new original series project starring Jennifer Aniston and based on Jeanette McCurdy's New York Times best-selling coming-of-age memoir. Described as a heartbreaking and hilarious recounting of McCurdy's struggles as a former child actor while dealing with her own overbearing, domineering mother, the dramedy will centre on the codependent relationship between an 18-year-old actress in a hit kids show and a narcissistic mother who relishes in her identity as a starlet's mother. Set to be played by Aniston, I'm Glad My Mum Died is executive produced and showrun by McCurdy, alongside Ari Katcher of Rami fame, and Jennifer Aniston, Sharon Horgan, Anne Merman, Lucky Chap, Jared Carmichael, and Erica Kay are set to executive produce. And of course, it's not long before we'll see Jennifer Aniston return to Apple TV Plus screens with September's return of newsroom drama The Morning Show. But we need to rewind a moment because as a fan of iCarly, in which McCurdy had her role as a young child actor, this is the first time that she's returning to the industry in any shape or form, as far as I understand it.
Yeah, she's been away from the industry for some time. She wasn't involved with the iCarly reboot that came out on Paramount Plus a couple of years ago, much to fans' dismay. But when she wrote this book and published it, I think a lot of people started to understand a little bit more about why she's distanced herself from the industry and needed some time to understandably heal from some of the things that she experienced. So I'm actually really excited and encouraged to see her coming back in this role and an opportunity to share part of her story, with a bit of dark humor. I think the title is one that catches people's eyes, and there's a lot more to the story, obviously, than just what the title would imply, but I think it'll be really great to see the story play out with her behind the scenes getting to guide it. And Jennifer Aniston as the mother, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's some really good casting there. Speaking of casting, one other bit of casting news this week, Bill Camp, who listeners will know from Presumed Innocent and The Queen's Gambit, will join previously announced stars Liev Schreiber, Zazie Beetz, and Stephen Graham in the Apple Original Series adaptation of Lars Kepler's series of crime novels following Philadelphia homicide detective Jonah Lynn. Camp will play Police Chief Ellison.
Lastly, for Apple Original News this week, some more positive news for Your Friends and Neighbours, which made its Nielsen Streaming Originals chart debut the week of its season finale, coming in at number 9 with 392 million minutes watched. Nielsen also noted that the series achieved a rare 50-50 male-female audience split in the final week of its first season as well. So we were talking about mainstream appeal. We never really talked about demographics and the male-female split, and it makes sense because we talked about family members and people that knew that I was into Apple Originals and Apple TV and how they wanted to share and even recommend a show thinking I hadn't seen it just yet. Obviously, don't listen to the podcast. It's very, very cool because it was very much a split in my personal experience as well. So yeah, very, very cool. Let's talk about this week's Apple TV releases. Another packed week. Of course, today sees new episodes of The Buccaneers and Stick, which is getting very, very emotional. I absolutely adore this show, and I hope we see many, many more seasons to come, but I am watching it on a week-to-week basis. I think, Devon, you're a little bit ahead of me in that regard. But yeah, such a good show. On Thursday, we see July's Apple Arcade releases, those being Angry Birds Bounce, Kingdom Rush 5 Alliance TD+, Suka Game Plus, and Creola's Scribble Scrubbing Pets Plus. And on Friday, we see the finale to Long Way Home and the penultimate episode of Murderbot, alongside a new episode of Smoke. I really hope that everyone tuned in for the 2-episode premiere. From those that I know that have, I think they were blown away, and I'm really, really excited to see how this goes. And then I think I'm going to revisit the podcast on which this is based. So for those that want to cheat a little bit and want to know what's coming, you've got a way there.
For Friday Night Baseball this week, we've got the St. Louis Cardinals at Chicago Cubs at 2:20 p.m. Eastern, and the Los Angeles Angels at Toronto Blue Jays at 7:07 p.m. Eastern. I did not realize this segment, but apparently starting at 7 past the hour is a tradition in baseball, and that explains that time, so make sure you're not late for that at 7:07 p.m. Thursday through Saturday, we've got MLS games throughout the extended holiday weekend on MLS Season Pass, which is now 50% off at $49 for the rest of the season and $39 for Apple TV Plus subscribers who haven't subscribed yet. And of course, for everyone who subscribes to Apple TV Plus and MLS Season Pass, Sunday Night Soccer this week features Seattle versus Columbus. For extras this week, we've got a little bit of something for everyone, starting with what's coming in July 2025, our sizzle reel for the month. I love these. I hope they keep these up. This is a great way to get excited, not only for the new releases for the month, but it also reminds you what's currently releasing as well, currently running shows, and I think that's really great. And it reminded me that Acapulco is coming back this next month segment, and man, I'm so excited for that. There are several Apple Fitness Plus workouts this week inspired by F1 the movie, including Time to Walk with Carrie Condon. They've got a collection of those listed. We'll link to those in the show notes. We've also got an inside look at Smoke, an actually helpful recap of Foundation, getting ready for Season 3 next week, Shrinking, Celebrating Pride with Michael Urie, and then an Apple News In Conversation with Jerry Bruckheimer and Joseph Kaczynski talking about the behind the scenes of F1. Jerry Bruckheimer was also on the Zane Lowe Show this week. If you haven't noticed, Sigmund, Apple really wants people to know that F1 the movie is in theaters now, and so they're hitting everything that they can, and it's great to see them putting out these interviews and talking more about the film. For fans of Stick, we've got Stick's Ultimate Guide to Golf Hotspots in Apple Maps, and Owen Wilson was on Hot Ones. That is as wholesome as you can imagine, and great to see him do that show. Just a great guy. You can just tell watching all the interviews that he does. It's cool to see his outlook on life and just the way he is in the world, and cool to see him on Hot Ones. And then finally, the Severance podcast is back on Thursdays. They're doing a 5-episode run featuring special guests talking about the inspiration behind the show, but also talking to super fans and answering more questions about Season 2. So if you want to hear more about Severance, if you're missing that in your life and you need something to hold you over till Season 3, the podcast is back, and we wanted to make sure everyone knew about that.
Very, very cool. I'm interested, because I haven't seen it yet, on how quick Owen Wilson reaches for the milk during his Hot Ones appearance. Really looking forward to checking out his culinary choices there. Other culinary choices at play came to a finale last week with the finale of Carême, and we're about to start our spoiler recap right now. So if you've not seen the show, please skip to the next chapter, and we'll see you a little bit later. For everyone else, Carême follows the thrilling story of the world's first celebrity chef, Antonin Carême, who rose from humble beginnings in Paris to the height of culinary stardom in Napoleon's Europe. While he dreams only of becoming the most famous chef in the world, his talent and ambitions attract the attention of renowned and powerful politicians who use him as a spy for France. Determined to escape poverty and fulfill his dream, Carême can choose revenge, or he can have it all: women, wealth, fame. But at what cost? This is created by Ian Kelly and David Serino, based on Kelly's book Cooking for Kings, directed by Martin Bourboulon, starring Benjamin Voisin, Jeremy Renier, Lida Kudry, and Alice Deleuze. There's a lot that happened in Carême, and we've got a lot to recap. So here's a quick recap of the series. It following, of course, the rise of Antoine Carême, a young chef working under his adopted father at the family's pastry shop. But when they're forced to cook for First Consul Napoleon Bonaparte and his soldiers, Carême finds Bonaparte in distress and concocts an elixir to save his life, putting Carême on the radar not only of the First Consul, but also of Foreign Minister Talleyrand. Now garnering both positive and unwanted attention, Carême's father is arrested under mysterious circumstances, with Talleyrand offering to help him out of prison if Carême works for him. And he orders Carême to use his position to his advantage, including influencing affairs between France and Britain with sweets and sneaking into Bonaparte's room to steal information for an attack. And things don't stop there, with Carême continuing to do Talleyrand's bidding in exchange for helping free his father, including a trip to convince the banished King Louis to abdicate the throne, a mission that's thwarted by Carême's girlfriend Henrietta, who is secretly working for police chief and royalist Fouché. And if that wasn't enough, I mean, things just continuously get worse for our chef provocateur as Fouché figures out that Carême was involved in the attack on Napoleon and pursues him as a suspect, also using his father as leverage. But when a police officer kills Carême's father during an attempted escape, Carême decides to take revenge and poison Fouché at Napoleon's coronation. Whilst he's forming his plan, Carême is informed by Fouché that Talleyrand's interest in him actually goes further than his cooking or espionage skills. Talleyrand is actually Carême's biological father, and he is the one who had Carême's father imprisoned in order to recruit him as a spy. So, fueled by rage and betrayal, Carême then sets his sights on killing Talleyrand. He questions whether or not he should go through with it, and is even encouraged by a conversation with the Pope to do what needs to be done to stop Talleyrand's misdeeds. When the day of the coronation comes, Carême has to deal with Bonaparte's demands as he grows the guest list exponentially the day of the event, as well as his own romantic troubles as Henrietta returns and Agathe reveals that she is pregnant with Carême's child. But his main concern is confronting Talleyrand, revealing that he knows the truth before deciding to spare his life and leave his kitchen, with the season ending with Carême and Agathe reopening the family pastry shop before Talleyrand resurfaces, informing Carême that he's been conscripted into Napoleon's latest war with Britain. But Talleyrand has a plan to work it all in his favour, with Carême's help of course. Meanwhile, a jilted Henrietta returns to Fouché, vowing that she wants to take down Carême once and for all. So, a lot to recap and a lot that we all went through with Carême throughout this season. Devon, this Napoleonic era story ended up being a really fun watch overall. Packed full. We didn't even get into the cooking contests, the divorce debates, and the controversy over the royal heir. In the midst of it all, were you happy to keep up? And what did you think of the season overall?
Yeah, it definitely was a lot to take in. And that recap, wow, it's a whirlwind of a life for Carême here. But I will say that actually having seen the Napoleon film first actually did help me with some of the historical context because it's a similar era. It's actually a little bit before a lot of the Napoleon film, but it did help me, and I thought that was kind of a cool crossover that we're seeing that same era depicted on screen in a different way. At the same time, while there was a lot happening, I don't think it was super confusing. There was a lot to take in, and every detail may not be totally clear to the viewer. It's also in French, so you've got that language barrier there as well, which, you know, I didn't find too confusing, but you could miss a detail here or there maybe. But I think picking up on the overall plot, it was pretty easy to do and easy to follow. I will say it was a super fun show to watch week to week and try to guess what was actually going on. I think I was expecting it to be a lot slower and more of a build-up towards his career, more focus on the cooking and that aspect of things. And, of course, it turned out to be much more about the espionage and just the twists and turns and everything that happened to him. So after about 2 or 3 episodes, I started just trying to guess at the beginning of each episode how it was going to end and what was going to happen next. And that was really fun because it actually was pretty hard to guess a lot of these things that were happening. And so, it was a really fun ride and one that was more exciting, I think, than I was expecting. And I think what the show gets right the most is its stakes, because even though everything's playing out in a minuscule, often petty way, the stakes are actually really high. So Carême's making a dessert for this dinner between Napoleon and a representative from Britain, and he's tasked with making a certain type of dessert, but then Napoleon changes the order at the last minute. That doesn't sound like a big deal, but the way this dinner goes could decide whether France and Britain are at war tomorrow. And so it really is this high stakes thing that he's having to work through the work of his food. And so it gets the viewer to care about French food and these social shifts that are happening. Even if they don't connect with the history personally, you understand why it's important what Carême's doing and how these seemingly minor squabbles and details actually do play out on a global scale if things go wrong. And I think that's a lot of fun.
I think also one thing that's really fun about this show is just how much was packed into this, right? I feel like I need a lay down after that recap because a lot of shows, I think, we've experienced it ourselves. The producers, the showrunners, everyone involved kind of pitched maybe a 3-season arc and withhold things. And this didn't feel like that at all. In fact, by the end of the season, you feel like there's more story to be told and more to be unearthed, and probably at the same pace, which is fascinating to me. Obviously, there's a lot of political intrigue going on with major twists and turns nearly every episode. Do you think the show has more to offer than just the shock value of it all? Because I think that's what really kind of stuck out, at least from the trailers, right, and the previews that we saw. And I think it may have actually initially put me off the show, because that was all really sold at the forefront, the sex, the debauchery of it all.
Yeah, and I think that is a big part of it, wondering what's going to happen next, and the explosions and the yelling and just not knowing what's going to happen in the next episode. But I don't think that's all the show has to offer necessarily. Carême himself is a very likable lead. He's much less arrogant than I think the trailers and the synopsis would lead you to believe, and maybe the historical context of the actual person. It's based on elements from his life, although, of course, every dramatization strays in some pretty big ways. I'd say they took some liberties with his story here, but he's actually has decent motivations, at least most of the time, and so it's good to see him as the central hero, and I was expecting him to be much harder for me to connect with than he was. Even from the very beginning, his humble beginnings and what he's trying to accomplish with his food. He cares very much about the work that he's doing, but he doesn't think he's better than other people. He's not, being rude to people, at least at this point in his life and things like that. So I thought he made a great lead. And then the villains, you just love to hate. Fouché, just a terrible person who does the most evil thing at every turn, and it's coming, and it still makes you mad every time. And then Talleyrand, he's that guy in the background kind of rubbing his hands together, scheming, trying to pull the strings, and just two great villains there to stack up against Carême, who gets caught in the middle of them because they also hate each other. And so it makes for some really interesting dynamics, but it's also just very satisfying to see Carême find a way to come out on top each time. He gets thrown all these curveballs, and every time he tries to cook a meal, something goes wrong. There's some ingredient that's missing, or something's gone bad. Someone's trying to undermine him. And he always uses his art and his work to not only overcome, but also bring people together. And I think there's something really satisfying and inspiring about that, and the underdog aspect of it all.
I mean, this being a French period piece centered around food, a good deal of the experience comes down to the production value, doesn't it? So how do you think the show delivered there? I guess there wasn't a time where, people were able to take photos of their food. A trend that I feel like's gone now. It's not really a Gen Z thing, more a Gen X thing.
Yeah, if you're still posting pictures of your food on Instagram, I think that gives away your age pretty quickly. But we don't have that as much to rely on from this time period. But I will say, I think they captured the time brilliantly from what I can tell. My one complaint during our highlight was some of the hair was a little bit not quite time-centric, but I feel like either I didn't notice it as much as I just got more involved in the show, or maybe it got better over time. But other than Carême's hair, which is just wild, I think the hair started to blend in for me. But the costuming, the set design, the food just got more dazzling as the series went on and Carême went deeper into French high society. We meet him and he's dirt poor. He's got this little shop that he's doing his best to try to give people beautiful things. But then once he gets in with the society of people who crave beautiful things and have seen it all before, and he's trying to give them something new, he goes to these parties that are just immaculate, and the things that he creates are just beautiful. And that whole aspect of it, just from a visual side and just taking it all in, was so satisfying as well. There's an explosion in the first episode, and the aftermath of that is quite striking. This gigantic set that they had to, explode and have all this debris and people around. And there was a scale to a lot of it as well that, you're in these giant castles and these big homes, and it's all very grand, I would say, but it feels very grounded as well. You can connect with it. It feels real. Of course, I ended every episode hungry for some French cuisine that I'd never tried before, never even heard of until this episode. But I was like, okay, I've got to try that now. I've got to get some French food. But more than anything, I want some macarons, Sigmund, because it feels like they're just in every scene of this show. The people here love their macarons, and Carême loves to make them, and they just look absolutely perfect in every scene. And I've got to order some of those after watching this series, because you're going to be hungry after watching this for sure.
I got to say, I think my French cuisine experience is quite limited to croissants and snails. I tried snails once in Morocco,
escargot.
Which was very, very cool. Yes, escargot. There we go. See, it sounds a lot better when you say it in that way. Now, given the way the season ends, it seemed like there was more of Carême's story to tell at, as we said already, at probably the same pace. Do you think there will be a second season? And if so, what are you hoping to see? Because for me personally, from a marketing point of view, I hope we get a series-inspired collection of recipes to coincide with each episode. I think TikTok and Instagram cooks would have literally ate that up this season.
Yeah, and Apple News Plus also has the food section now, so that would have been a perfect integration there as well. So, yeah, we need the Carême cookbook. Of course, we have his original recipes from way back when. We can recompile those, put Benjamin Vasson's face on the front of it, though, and republish that. I think that would work great, and make lots of extras of more food to make us hungry. I think that would be awesome. I could definitely see the show carrying on for more seasons. The way it ends, it feels like it's trying to set up for a second season. It does that thing that I don't necessarily love with the cliffhanger with Henriette. And, I think that they're hoping for a renewal, and it feels like Apple's trying to invest in French productions and productions in all kinds of different areas. So this feels like, why not carry on with it? It's a show they have, and it could help out there. And also I think it's a compelling story that they could carry on. So yeah, I hope it carries on. They did stray from the real Carême's life in some ways throughout the season, as I mentioned, but there's still elements from his life I think they could pull in and kind of toe that line between historical and drama that they did this season. I think they did a good job with it. So I think they could still continue to tell the broader strokes of his story while making it a little more interesting on screen, because you've got to do that. This unlikely alliance between Talleyrand and Carême could make for some really interesting dynamics now that their power balance is more level. The secrets are all out, and they thought they were done with each other, but now they're pulled back together by this war that neither of them wants to be involved in. I think that could make for some really interesting stories and conversations. And me, I'm a sucker, Sigmund. I'm all about redemption and people coming back together. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, so maybe they could work something out eventually, but we'll see. And then, of course, the whole thing with Carême becoming a father. I feel like this is a character who, based on what I know about him, I'd actually love to see him as a father. I question a lot of his decisions, but I think his character and his heart is good. And I could see him in Agathe in a little pastry shop with a little one. I think that would be really fun to see as well. And then, of course, I have to say it, Sigmund, more food, please. Expose me to more French cuisine. Make me hungry, because they did such a good job this season. I would love to see this carry on. I hope we get a season 2 renewal before long from Apple.
You can, of course, recap the whole of season 1 of Carême, now streaming in full on Apple TV Plus across all of your screens. But Devon, it is time for us to talk about TV app highlights in the Apple TV app this week. It's a great time at the moment to go and see movies, but it's also a fantastic time to stay home and watch movies. It's so hot in London at the moment that in the evenings I've had the windows open, I've had the cinema system on full blast, and I've been watching a movie or two every night where I can't sleep. So unhealthy, but also healthy for the soul, for me at least. And we begin with some PVOD releases now available, including Apple original film The Instigators, now available to purchase, and From the World of John Wick, Ballerina, which honestly was a personal disappointment for me when I saw it in theatres recently, but there was some absolutely fabulous location work throughout the film that has to be seen to appreciate it. So, you know, if you're at a loose end and it's something of interest to you, that might be a clincher there. Thunderbolts has an asterisk by its name and sports a stellar cast that's sure to prick the attention of even the most beaten down superhero cynic movie fan. And The Day the Earth Blew Up, a Looney Tunes movie, is now available on HBO Max. In terms of my highlights this week, Swamp Dogg Gets His Pool Painted is a comedic documentary that follows legendary musician Swamp Dogg, who is a genuine eccentric responsible for some of the most unique rock-influenced R&B and wildest album covers ever made. Hidden away deep in suburban Los Angeles, Swamp Dogg, alongside housemates Mogstar and guitar Shorty, have transformed his home into an artistic playground, and together they navigate the tumultuous waves of the music industry and forge a wonderfully bizarre and inspiring path across time and space. Quote, "A fun, hilarious and unconventional film for a perfectly unconventional life." And also this week is Tornado, starring Tim Roth, Slow Horses, Jack Lowden, and Takira Hira, alongside Japanese singer-songwriter Koki. This is a surreal samurai spaghetti western in 18th century Georgian Britain. And if that doesn't have you at least partially interested, then I don't know what director John McClane can do to get audiences interested in his seriously impressive B-movie genre crossovers. And lastly, Friday, July 4th, Independence Day, The Luckiest Man in America on AMC Plus, a great family treat, a film that I loved so much, previous Up Next pick of mine, alongside On Becoming a Guinea Fowl, more for the adult audiences amongst you, on HBO Max, and Sinners makes its HBO Max debut with a special inclusion exclusively for HBO Max subscribers.
Yes, HBO Max has been blazing the way with its ASL versions of films and TV shows lately, and now they're taking the next step with Sinners, debuting a Black American Sign Language version. So this is a special dialect of ASL that they say ASL speakers will be able to pick up on, but it's also especially for this particular community. It's the first of its kind, and it's very cool to see. We definitely want to applaud HBO Max for its accessibility efforts and continuing to push this forward, and we hope to see more of it.
Absolutely. Let's get into Up Next picks, and I'm actually going to start this week. It's so funny that both of our picks are in a way related. I'll get there in a moment. But my pick is Bring Her Back. This is the second feature from Danny Philippou and Michael Philippou, Australian twins from Adelaide, whose 2022 debut Talk to Me had everyone talking about their immense talent following their transition from YouTube. Bring Her Back is a brilliant film about a brother and sister who uncover a terrifying ritual at the secluded home of their new foster mother. It stars Billy Barrett, who will soon return in Apple original series Invasion, the incredible Sally Hawkins from The Shape of Water, and the acting debut of partially blind actor Sora Wong, who is an absolute revelation in this. But it's the mostly silent performance from Jonah Wren Phillips that really steals the show. This is a R-rated horror film that's incredibly powerful from a psychological point of view, and it had me watching on mostly peering above and through multiple pillows and my fingers, Devon. It's got elements of body horror and features a predominantly young cast, so this will not be for everyone. But it is a film that will demand your respect, and one I wanted to shine a light on. The makeup application for some of the more squeamish scenes, the almost Paddington mum facade that Sally Hawkins' character puts on, is also as haunting. And there's a really interesting exposition at play that's wrapped up in both trauma and grief. And given the absolute focus of the filmmakers and the lack of frivolity at play, this is a film that has lived on through both my waking and sleeping hours. But it's a film that I will likely only watch maybe once or twice more in my lifetime, Devon, given its impact. I do want to very quickly say that there are a lot of scenes, and I'd say almost the whole film is putting young people through perilous situations. So this is not, again, for everyone. Definitely viewing discretion advised on this one. But if you're up for it, it's incredibly challenging and rewarding, and it's just a really, really well put together film for the genre, and I think probably this year's best in horror. I'd be surprised if anything lives up to it. So, yeah, Bring Her Back is my up next pick this week. And Devon, I've got a funny feeling that really this week we are demonstrating our polar opposites when it comes to movies, but your pick is also about bringing someone back, and from the director Mark Webb, who was behind one of my favourite films of all time, 500 Days of Summer.
Yeah, also the Amazing Spider-Man series. Great
Absolutely.
couple of films. So he's back. He's with Disney now, and he did the new Snow White. And I just want to use my short time here on Up Next segment to say justice for the 2025 Snow White. Okay? I heard about it in theaters. People had their takes. Listen, this is a film that people adored, have adored for generations. Remaking it, you're not going to please everybody. But I just have to say, Rachel Zegler did a great job. I enjoyed it a lot. As someone who watched Snow White growing up, loved Disney in general growing up. I was a huge Disney kid. I mean, you could tell I'm a Disney adult in a lot of senses. But I love these live action remakes. I think it's cool to see the stories that I loved growing up that were using cutting edge technology for their time, now using cutting edge technology for this day to bring the story to a new generation. Noah watched it with us and he enjoyed it, so that was cool. And we're also introducing him to some of the older Disney classics. Don't worry, we're making sure he gets a full education. But I thought this was great. I enjoyed the music. I enjoyed the whole experience. It's one of those things that touching a story like this is difficult, but I applaud those who did it. Gal Gadot is the evil queen, a little over the top, but you kind of need that for that role. So I respect it. I enjoyed it. And I'm here to say that if the reviews and all the social media commentary of the new Snow White put you off of it, it's on Disney Plus now. And I recommend giving it a shot, going in with an open heart, because it touched mine. I enjoyed it.
I really enjoyed Rachel Zegler in West Side Story. So, the performance is probably the closest from her to that. And so that may be enough for people. I watched it this week.
Yeah, I think you watched it after seeing me put it in our list as the up next pick. So I'm going to go ahead and count that as at least one person who checked it out. Maybe others will as well. Anyway, that's what we've got for you this week. Thanks so much for listening. We appreciate everyone who takes the time to spend with us every week. And we also appreciate hearing your feedback, what you're watching, and what you think about the things that we're talking about. So if you have anything you'd like to share, you can contact us on social media via the links in the show notes. And you can reach out via our contact form, which we'll also link in the show notes.
We'll be back next week with the return of Foundation and more. So until then, stay safe, watch some Apple TV, play some Apple Arcade, and have a great week.
Hi ho, Sigmund.